So typically when you think about banks, you think of one of three things. You either think it's a place that can loan you money on your car or your house, or an institution that issues you credit cards, or lastly, just the game Monopoly. But what you don't typically think or see is overseas money laundering or the Bulgarian drug traffic trade. But now you might be thinking to yourself, how are the banks and the Bulgarian drug trade actually connected to one another? Let's dive a little bit deeper into why this one bank is being fined $20 million by the Swiss government, and just exactly how you are funding these banks and some of these illegal operations. As of Monday, June 27, 2022, Switzerland's own largest bank, Credit Suisse, and a former employee were found guilty in a Swiss federal court for helping a Bulgarian crime ring launder money related to one drug in particular that I'm not going to say on YouTube, but let's just say it looks like powdered sugar. I guess they were shoveling a little bit of snow, if you catch my drift. The court found that Credit Suisse didn't do enough to prevent the money laundering by this crime ring. And the court prosecutors said that they were able to shovel tons, and I mean tons, of powdered sugar into many European countries and was washed by Credit Suisse themselves. And the term wash kind of goes with the whole narrative of what's called dirty money, which is any money that's just produced or saved by illegal means, i.e. drug trade or money laundering. And typically a lot of what these people do are what's called smurfing. And while it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a bunch of small little blue people running around stealing money, the term small is actually the most important fact there. Pretty much 100% of banks have this threshold of $10,000, which pretty much means that anytime that you deposit money of $10,000 or more, there needs to be a manager in place and it gets reported immediately to the greater bank. But anything under that amount of $10,000, so $9,999 or less, doesn't necessarily get reported and can kind of go under the radar. So what these gangs do is just put millions and millions of transactions of $9,999, whether it be by checks, cash, or even safety deposit boxes. Credit Suisse is none the wiser, and this is most likely in cooperation with some people who actually work at Credit Suisse. And now all of these amounts and these millions of dollars being laundered are pretty much tax-free, as the government doesn't even see it. The prosecutors also allege that their former management helped conceal the criminal origins of up to 150 million Swiss francs. Of that amount, about 30% of it, or 50 million of it, being in cash. So Credit Suisse itself, the people that run it, still dispute the illegal origin of all of the money that was trafficked through the Bulgarian drug trade. And this is not necessarily Credit Suisse's first go-around with offering its banking services with very high-risk individuals. Despite having a lot of red flags, even after they pledged to crack down on any dirty or shady money. And over a longer period of time, Credit Suisse has actually been tied to a lot of other scandals over the years. There was also something called the tuna bond affair, which was technically a series of deals raising money to the amount of about $2 billion. What was the reason, you may ask? They were supposedly raising money for tuna fishing in Mozambique. Some investigators of this case said that about 200 million or 10% of the total money raised was diverted to paying bribes and kickbacks to enrich foreign officials and foreign bankers at Credit Suisse. Let me know in the comments below, do you think that the other 90% was actually for tuna fishing? Upon prosecution, Credit Suisse was ordered to pay a fine of about $500 million to the United States and the United Kingdom to resolve these charges of foreign bribery. Just some quick ones to note, apparently there was some spying. Apparently there were some relations to the organization FIFA, and also one of the most important ones that a lot of you guys probably were affected by in the stock market about a year ago. Do you guys remember the implosion of Archegos? To put it quickly, Credit Suisse provided a lot of liquidity, aka giving money to Archegos, so that investors like you and me can put our money in Archegos and buy some stocks and or short some stocks. Now a lot of these institutions are supposed to have limits, such as margin requirements or even deposit amounts, as to not over-risk or over-leverage the bank's money just in case there's an economic downturn. And I guess Archegos kind of disregarded this limit, as their margin requirements kept creeping up higher and higher, meaning more and more people can borrow more money, and pretty much endlessly, so that Archegos can keep loaning out money, which means they'll make more on you, which is all great as the market's doing well and going up. But as we know, about a year ago is when the market started trending down. And if any of you have ever played with margin, you know what happens next. Archegos had lended out essentially more than they had on their balance sheet and more that Credit Suisse actually offered them, which led to them raising margin requirements more, which means Credit Suisse now has to provide more liquidity. And so the steps continued to go down and down and down, until the whole organization went bankrupt and offered losses to Credit Suisse up to $5.5 billion. Now some of you might be saying, oh, it's not Credit Suisse's fault, it's Archegos' fault. Credit Suisse, among other banks, lended money to Archegos, but they're supposed to actually keep track of where their money is going. and they're supposed to keep track of Archegos and what their margin requirements are and how leveraged they are. So again, just a bit of negligence, and I'm sure that money was loaned out so they can get a better return themselves. So it seems like a lot of people are not innocent there. Unfortunately, a lot of these institutions, these people, these banks fall victim to one of the deadly sins. We all know that as greed. Now, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen next, and as of right now, it's just a fine, and I'm sure there's going to be other debacles in the future. I hope not. I guess the moral of the story is be careful where you loan your money to. They might just take your money and loan it out to Bulgarian drug trades.